All right. Is this on? I think so. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Endowment for Democracy. I'm Katie Campo, the Program Officer for Sudan and South Sudan, for those of you who don't know me. If you want to follow along on Twitter today, the hashtags are hashtag Sudan Dialogue and hashtag Ned Events. Oh, thanks, Mike. First, I'll give you a brief intro to the National Dialogue in Sudan, which is the topic of our discussion today. As some of you may know, in January 2014, President Bashir announced in a public statement that he plans to launch a national dialogue to bring together all of Sudan's opposition political parties, armed movements, civil society representatives, and the government to have a holistic solution to many of Sudan's different problems. However, almost 2 years later, we still have not totally seen a genuine dialogue get off the ground. There's been a lot of waiting and debating. The opposition and civil society have been holding out. They don't want to participate. Now they do want to participate. Now they don't want to participate. A lot of back and forth for 2 years now. But I still think we need to be optimistic about the national dialogue. And I think the biggest problem in Sudan is that there's this lack of trust between both sides. And if we can just get each side to give a little bit and start to build trust, that's when you might actually start to see some real progress and when we could have a genuine national dialogue. So my favorite phrase in Sudan is, shwaya shwaya, little by little, we can start to build trust between the two sides. Our panel here today, I think, is a good representation of building that trust by bringing together civil society representatives, the government of Sudan, and Nimat, who represents the advocacy community. She will be here, inshallah, eventually. We'll just shuttle her up on stage when she arrives. With that, I'll give a quick introduction to each of our speakers. We have Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Steve Feldstein. We also have Ambassador Muawiyah Khalid, who is who is the Chargé d'Affaires at the Sudanese Embassy here in Washington. Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, who is our civil society representative from our NED grantee organization, the Sudanese Development Initiative. He also serves on the Confederation of Sudanese Civil Society Organizations, which is the group, the network of civil society groups that put out the report, which will be discussed. And we have Nimat Ahmadi, who is the president and founder of Darfur Women Action Group. And Ambassador Lyman has been kind enough to agree to moderate the panel. Ambassador Lyman is now the senior advisor to the president of the U.S. Institute of Peace, but we all know him as the well-respected former special envoy to Sudan and South Sudan. And with that, I will turn it over to Ambassador Lyman, and we look forward to all your questions. And please do use the hashtags to make this a fun event on social media.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you all for being here today. I think this is going to be a very valuable and very important discussion. I'm going to ask Abdul Rahman to be the first speaker, if Nimat comes in time to be the second, and then ask Steve Feldstein third, and then allow the ambassador to wrap it up and answer all the questions that have been raised by then. National dialogues, as many of you know, have a long and somewhat uneven history. They were very influential in the early 1990s in Africa, in the breakdown of one-party states and military dictatorships, starting in Benin and then spreading very quickly around the continent. But we've also seen pushback and stalling in the democratic process in Africa. Some African countries, though, therefore have called again for national dialogues. We saw a variation of that in Nigeria a few years ago, and a kind of a dialogue in Kenya around the Constitution. More recently, national dialogues have gained prominence in Tunisia and Yemen. In Tunisia, the dialogue seems to have helped greatly in steering that country through the Arab Spring and avoiding civil war. Notably, 4 Tunisian civil society leaders won the Nobel Peace Prize for their work in this regard. The national dialogue in Yemen started off with great expectations, considerable inclusivity, and a broad agenda. But the major political issues dividing Yemen proved too difficult for the dialogue to resolve. And as we know, that country has now, alas, fallen into a terrible civil war with great humanitarian costs. In Sudan, the need for a national dialogue would appear to be very appropriate. The country has experienced largely one-party rule for 26 years, leaving other political parties, regional populations, and civil society feeling marginalized and their freedoms repressed. Civil war has torn apart the region of Darfur, leaving 2 million still displaced, and unrest now cutting across racial and ethnic lines. An insurgency has been underway for 4 years in the states of Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile. But even more, I would say psychologically and politically, the country has not fully incorporated the loss of Southern Sudan and what that means not only politically, but in terms of national identity. Given these fundamental issues, a national dialogue has been endorsed by the government, by civil society, and by international mediators such as the Africa Union High-Level Panel headed by former South African President Thabo Mbeki. As Katie pointed out, the national dialogue has been launched, but a lot of difficulty arises over agenda, over participation, and perhaps most of all about the atmosphere in which the dialogue is taking place. The crackdown on civil society that has occurred over the last year and the ongoing conflicts in both Darfur and the Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, which make it difficult to move forward with their participation and the participation of others. So we will want to get into all these issues today, but we'll start with the benefit of Abdul Rahman Ahmadi's report on a very interesting and significant effort by civil society, in spite of all these problems, to not only define the role of civil society, but to define more broadly what a national dialogue should look like. So if I can, Abdul Rahman, I'll ask you to start.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ambassador. And thanks to NED for hosting this meeting. My name is Abdurrahman Al-Mahdi. I am a director of a Sudanese NGO called SUDIA, which stands for Sudanese Development Initiative. I'm also an executive committee member of a network of Sudanese organizations called the Confederation of Sudanese Civil Society Organizations. And the Confederation is basically a coalition of around 26 or 28 civil society organizations that was formed late 2012, early 2013, in response to the closing civic space for civil society in Sudan, the closures of some of the NGOs that happened in late 2012 and extended all the way through 2013. So in response, a few of our NGOs got together and said, let's band together and see what we can do to counter that closing space and keep our activities going. So this is a quick background to the Confederation. What we did in 2014, after the initiative by the President on national dialogue, calling for national dialogue, is we thought we would have some kind of consultation within civil society about dialogue. The idea was to consult with different groups of civil society representatives on 4 key points. One was to look at the current state of affairs for civil society. A second point was looking or trying to understand what dialogue meant to us as civil society, what are the concepts, what it stood for. Third point was to try and probe some of the issues for a dialogue at both a national level and a regional level, because some regions have their own peculiarities. And lastly, to look at the role of civil society in any forthcoming dialogue. We did our work in the form of a workshop, which was run for 3 days with a good representation of civil society. We divided Sudan according to the former 6 regions of Sudan, which is Eastern Sudan, Northern region, Central region, Darfur, and Kordofan. And within the 18 states would be divided into these 6 regions, and ran 6 consultation workshops, which lasted for 3 days. with approximately over 250 representatives from civil society across the 6 regions. Looking at the 4 points or questions that we were probing. In relation to the first point, which is the current state of affairs in the region, what prevailed was that generally the space is very tight, and it's very difficult to actually carry out activities in all the regions. Civil society has to comply with laws that are restrictive, and sometimes the laws themselves are not very clear. So it's the procedures that come under the laws that make life very difficult for us. So the registration process, which takes long, the permissions for activities, and this is especially the case in the areas where there's conflict, like South Kordofan or Blue Nile State. So the environment is quite hostile to the work of civil society. And most prominent for us as NGOs registered under something called the Humanitarian Aid Commission is the Voluntary and Humanitarian Works Act, which regulates the work of civil society organizations, which we feel is contradictory and to the Constitution. So that's generally the state of affairs and the difficulties facing our work as civil society. We then looked at what civil society means to us as what dialogue means to us as civil society. And there we came up with 3 key concepts. Dialogue should be fair, it should be transparent, and it should be inclusive. So these are 3 things that are paramount for any dialogue to happen in Sudan. The other thing is something which we have always called for since last year, which is the environment. We need an enabling environment for dialogue to happen. So without that in place, it's really very difficult to talk about dialogue. And when we talk about enabling environment, we identify things like a cessation of hostilities, freedom of movement, reform of some of the laws, such as the security law, the Press and Publications Act, the Voluntary Humanitarian Works Act. So some legal reform has to happen to create that enabling environment. But again, inclusivity, freedom, and transparency are essential to a dialogue. Then we looked at the issues which should be shaped, which should come up in a dialogue. And we came up with issues that were national, and these could be centered on or in 4 key groups. Good governance is one of them, so things like the constitution and constitution making and so forth. Peace building is another key issue, which is of a national level. Legal and human rights, so laws, looking at laws and human rights situation in Sudan, that should be tackled in any dialogue. And lastly, the economy and development. And under each of these key categories, we came up with sub-issues, which you will find in the report, which should be around. But then we also looked at, besides the national issues, there are regional issues. So some regions have their specificities. So for example, northern region, the issue of the dams, the construction of the dams is a big issue for them. The loss of some of their Nubian heritage in the northern region, the loss of date palms, which is big for them, is a big issue. In the eastern region, it was human trafficking from the neighboring states. Darfur spoke about people coming in from outside Sudan and settling down in areas and lands that were populated by communities who have now been displaced because of the conflict and have moved to the IDP camps. So these are some of the specifics for each region that maybe did not come across at the national level, but civil society felt they should be tackled in any forthcoming dialogue. And the spread of small arms, Kordofan, Blue Nile, Darfur is big. And that came out as a real issue for them. Moving on, we looked at the role of civil society in any dialogue, in any forthcoming dialogue. There we started off, we said, well, civil society has a big role to play in shaping the dialogue. So what I mean by shaping is before a dialogue actually happens, you need to have all the stakeholders together in the room, around the table, talking about the issues related to a dialogue. And in that regard, we went back to the resolution by the African Union Peace and Security Council that called for the government to hold pre-negotiations, pre-dialogue negotiations with some of the armed groups. And we said that needs to be expanded. It should not just be the armed groups. You should have the political opposition parties in that pre-dialogue, and you should have civil society represented in any such pre-dialogue. We also went ahead and suggested an agenda for such a pre-dialogue. And at the top of the agenda would be confidence building measures for a dialogue. So what are these? And setting a roadmap and checks and balances to make sure that these confidence building measures do happen. And there civil society can definitely play a role in monitoring these checks and balances. Guarantees, what guarantees are there for the outcomes of any dialogue? Decision-making processes for the dialogue. Will we be making decisions by consensus, majority votes? Defining the role of the different actors in a dialogue, and the organization and structure of the dialogue. And last but not least is the timeline. How long will we hold this dialogue for? So that was the first piece that we can be involved, we will be involved in, and we want to be involved in, and it needs to happen before a dialogue really actually happens. Then civil society can also play a role in leading the dialogue at the local level. Given the outreach and the presence of civil society organizations and groups outside Khartoum, at the locality level, at the state level, there's a role to be played there in terms of holding similar consultations like what we did and making these voices heard at the national level. Thirdly, participating in the national dialogue itself as a key stakeholder. And lastly, monitoring and reporting on, after the dialogue, the actual implementation of the outcomes of the dialogue. So these are the 4 key areas that we see ourselves involved in. And last, we ended up with some recommendations being made for 4 distinct groups. One of them is civil society itself. Secondly, the government. Thirdly, the armed groups and political parties. And lastly, the international community. For civil society, there's a number of recommendations. Foremost and at the top of them is building a wide coalition of civil society organizations and networks for the dialogue. So this is something that we've already started doing and meeting and talking to other groups that are concerned with issues of the dialogue within civil society and trying to form a broad coalition. We're also hoping to engage with different actors and the other actors like the armed groups, the government itself. We would like to reach out and talk to about this report and see how we can find common ground on some of the things and move forward with some of the ideas we have. For the international community, one of the recommendations that sticks out is technical assistance. And technical assistance not just to a dialogue process that happens, but technical assistance even to the AU high-level implementation panel in terms of running these meetings and in terms of preparing for a pre-dialogue meeting and facilitating that meeting so that you actually do end up achieving common ground and reaching agreement amongst these often divergent stakeholders when they do come into the room. So again, technical assistance is important, and overseeing some of the things to do with the actual implementation of the dialogue. Thank you. I'm there.
Good.
And so thank you.
Very good, very good. I appreciate it. And now Steve Feldstein, please.
I think she is here,
Oh,
actually.
Nima.
Maybe she wants to go. And then
Please. Okay, wait.
go from the podium to the one.
Sorry. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much for the National Endowment for Democracy for providing us this opportunity to talk about issues in Sudan. Thank you, Ambassador Lyman, for moderating the panel and your introduction. Um, Speaking about the national dialogue, we cannot speak about the national dialogue without looking at the current situation in Sudan and tying it into how that can be brought into any kind of dialogue that we may be hoping for. In reference to now, firstly, if you want to speak about the problem or the solution, you have to speak about the problem and also the root cause so that you can be able to set up a solution that can be meeting the root cause or addressing the root causes of the problem. And clearly in Sudan, the problem in Sudan is deeply rooted in it is exclusion of the majority of the population in the country from being a part of shaping the life of the Sudanese people, whether it is social, political, economic, or cultural. And that has exacerbated by marginalization and ended up creating so many crises. There are multiple crises that right now are challenging us and exacerbating the suffering of the people of Sudan. Speaking about Darfur, and I'm going to be very frank and clear. Let us agree to disagree. Some people may disagree with me. The genocide that started 12 years ago, it is still continuous as of today. Over 4 million people have been severely affected. At least 3 million of them are living right now out of their homes in the camps, fearful to go back, but they have nothing to go back for. And back in 2006, the United Nations estimated that over 300 people have been killed. Since then, there hasn't been update to those numbers, but the fighting, the bombing, the burning continues, and the displacement have increased, particularly in the last 3 years of 2012, 2014. The scale of violence had reached to the beginning of the genocide in Darfur as of 2003, 2004. In 2013, there has been over 360,000 new displacement in Darfur, 500,000 in 2014, and as of today, there's still ongoing violence in Darfur. Systematic rape has been used against women and girls in Darfur. These are the 50% of the population that you target them with the most brutal act of violence. And the recent incident of Tabit is a testament to what I am trying to say, to explain here, in which she, in one night between October 30 to October 31st, there has been a report of rape of over 221 women in one village. That's not very far from al-Bashir, the historical and the capital city of North Darfur. Unfortunately, there hasn't been investigation by the UN. There hasn't been medical or psychological treatment provided to those victims, but they are terrified, terrorized by the government for speaking out, and most of them have abandoned Tabit for fear of being killed. This is simply the situation. The humanitarian effort has been severely restricted. As of today, none of the international are allowed to go to Darfur. If you are a US citizen, you can't go to Darfur, whether an NGO representative or government representative. So that means this is simply what we know, but what we don't know is even more and dangerous. So you can imagine these are the entire region that has been completely isolated. People are living in fear and oppression. In 2011, the conflict spilled over into South Kordofan and Blue Nile. Nearly 1 million people have been driven out of their homes, currently living in caves in the neighboring countries. In some camps, they are lacking minimal means of survival. Blue Nile and South Kordofan. These are two states that were part and parcel of the comprehensive peace agreement that has achieved independence for South Sudan. Unfortunately, this happened in violation of that comprehensive peace agreement, because the comprehensive peace agreement, we all know that, granted these two regions popular consultation but there hasn't been a popular consultation. Instead, the government manipulated and declared election and sent the person who was indicted for war crimes in Darfur to run South Kordofan affairs. So you could imagine. So the conflict was predictable. Speaking about other regions, Eastern Sudan, for example, in 2006, there has been a peace agreement. But today, unfortunately, Eastern Sudan is not in peace, it's not in war. But people are dying from malnutrition, TB, HIV/AIDS, hunger. People have no voice. Speaking about the human rights condition in the capital Khartoum, forget about this crisis-affected areas. It is known, it is well known, you can't even be able to express it. But in Khartoum, inside Khartoum, there are 40 students who are protesting, simply asking for waiving the tuition fees so that they can continue their education to become part of this country in the future. They are abducted, arrested, tortured, and forced to leave education. Collective dismissal of students from universities because of simply speaking up has been a constant trend that targeted Darfuri students. Journalists, lawyers, civil society leaders, these are the people who choose the peaceful means to pursue change in Sudan. They are targeted for arrest, torture, abduction, and degrading treatment. Women are 50% of the population of any nation. Any solution to be brought to a nation without women cannot. And Sudan is well known with a history of women being leaders in our communities. The women of Sudan, the women of Darfur, and all of this region have contributed to shaping the life of the Sudanese people historically. But today, that role has been denied for them. Inside Khartoum, when girls are arrested, they are subjected to sexual assault, rape, and violence. There is the Popular Defense Act that enacted and become as if a law. Today, a security or personnel or a policeman can beat a woman like me because simply if you dress just like me or you wear a pants. Women have no choice to what they wear. This is very simple. The people that are supposed to protect the people, protect their right, they are violating their right. In the last 2 weeks, an article that I was just about to bring it with me, a woman who was chased by the police. She has been arrested, and this is a tea maker woman who is always subjected to kasha, which is like they forcibly taking her her equipment and throwing them away, and she's taken to court. She has to pay penalty, and she has to go again buy this stuff and get also arrested again. She was running away from the police. The police was chasing her. She fed up and threw herself into the river, but she has an infant, and she don't want to kill her infant with her. She put the infant aside and jumped into the river. The policeman take the child and throw the child into the river. This is the record of the human right of our country. It's very unfortunate. So whatsoever the case, right now in Khartoum, there are two types of civil societies. There are civil societies that are really genuine. They want to help. They are working with people. Unfortunately, there is a clear law that have been imposed. Most of them, their license have been revoked. Their operation has been seized, and restriction posed on them. They can't receive funding from outside of the country. But there are other civil societies that they can move around, they can do their work, because most of them, if not, they are promoting the policy that the government is interested to promote, or either they are not doing what the people want them to do. So this is quite clear that right now civil society have no voice in Sudan, and they cannot change the situation for the people of Sudan. There is no freedom of expression. There is no freedom of assembly. There is no freedom of association today in Sudan. So speaking about the national dialogue, yes, the people of Sudan need it, but is this the environment in which we can conduct a successful national dialogue? I would say no. Simply say no. Ambassador Lyman has brought a very good example of Tunisia, Yemen, I will add Liberia, and Rwanda. The national dialogue right now, as if we are putting the horse behind the cart and trying to push, it's not going to go anywhere, because when about 50% of the population of the country cannot even speak for themselves, not forget about it, speak for themselves, they are struggling for their daily survival. They are fearful. They are living in fear. Unless people are free from fear, free from want, and have a place to stay and able to speak their mind, there will not be a constructive consultation. Consultation or the national dialogue happen in these countries after the effect, when a solution already been made. There was peace agreement. In the case of Liberia, the criminal was taken away. There was peace deal signed. Then the people of that country came together. Let us sit down, constructively talk, admit the harm that people experience, um, recognize the plight of those who have been victimized. There is no recognition whatsoever in Sudan today. I am a genocide survivor, but some people say there is no genocide in Sudan. Continuously. In the United States, I hear that every day. My people are right now dying. I lost more than 150 of my family. People denying that. So if there is denial, so how I can overcome and reconcile with these people, forget about those women who have been oppressed until today. So in those situations, that there are certain steps has been taken. Then following to those steps, people of that country came together. They were free to discuss. They were able to speak their mind. And then they were looking, like decided to agree to look forward together to build their country. The same situation in Yemen and in Tunisia. But right now, you can't bring the victim and the perpetrator and tell them, go, guys, talk. I think it will be really funny, or either like we use self-deception. And unfortunately today in Sudan, because of the long suffering, because of the long oppression, so many people tend to use self-deception. It's okay, they can come sit in the dialogue. So there are few people, I can't speak for everyone. Some people may say, yes, we want the national dialogue. There are some northern oppositions that they still are in dialogue with government, and the government has some alliance with some of the opposition. They can speak, but they're already speaking to each other. So what is new? They're still speaking to each other. But there are some people, our concern is about those who are dying, who have been oppressed, who have no voice. If we want to bring a real solution to Sudan, include those who have been historically marginalized. Otherwise, we are deceiving the people of Sudan. And any support, any international support, whether US government or international NGOs supporting this kind of dialogue, is just helping prolonging the suffering of the people of Sudan, delaying solutions, and also helping the government to get away with whatever they committed in Sudan. I will stop here and we'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
I think you couldn't have placed the issue more candidly about the environment in which the issue of dialogue could or should not take place in Sudan. So thank you, Nimad. It was a very powerful statement. I want to turn to Steve Feldstein, as you know, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Human Rights, State Department.
Thank you, Ambassador Lyman, and I want to thank NED for hosting this important discussion. And I maybe want to start by just saying I was very struck by the remarks that Niamat just made. These echo many of the concerns that we have mentioned a lot from the human rights perspective in terms of the environment and the massive humanitarian crisis that is especially relevant to Darfur and the two areas. And so I think it's important for all of us as we think about the political situation to not forget as well the drastic and the appalling human rights and humanitarian conditions that continue to persist in the country. And I think, to me, that really sets us up to think about two particular things when it comes to a national dialogue. Because I think, many of the concerns that have been echoed, especially when it comes to the ability of civil society and different groups to participate, relate to the fact that, something has to be given in order for a real national dialogue to occur. And at the end of the day, the government also needs to be willing to give up something in order to get real tangible outcomes that emanate from the dialogue. And without those two ideas sort of, I think, central at the outset to what a national dialogue ought to be, I think we're in for a difficult set of challenges. So let me go in a little bit here, and maybe we can return to that theme at the end. But I think the biggest question right now that we're all obligated to think about as we talk about a national dialogue today really is what makes this moment any different or more significant than the past moments we have had going back nearly 24 months since the intent to hold a national dialogue was first announced. What I think that makes this moment more important is that, frankly, we are running out of time to initiate a national dialogue that will still have legitimacy and credibility. I think it's been a long road, and we've had many false starts and dashed expectations. We have hoped for many months that ongoing human rights abuses and violations, including attacks against civilians in Darfur and the two areas, ongoing restrictions of fundamental freedoms, those types of issues would cease, at least temporarily, in order to build appropriate confidence to make a national dialogue possible. In fact, when I first visited Sudan earlier this year in February, that was the core message that we transmitted, which was essentially that all sides need to cease hostilities, and that the government needs to stop actions, including imprisoning and detaining opposition activists, as a necessary precondition to start a credible dialogue. That didn't happen, and in the intervening period, we had a difficult election, but little progress. So here we are today. Recently, we have started to see some glimmers of potential progress. Violence in Darfur and the two areas in October and November, for the first time in a while, has been significantly down. Although I would note that in the Darfur region alone, there are now more than 2.5 million internally displaced persons and 4.4 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, which is really an astonishing number. The government and rebel movements have indicated a willingness to negotiate a more lasting cessation of hostilities with support from former South African President Mbeki and the African high-level implementation panel, as well as the United States Troika partners, together with our special envoy, Ambassador Donald Booth. As we have maintained for a long time, a real cessation of hostilities is an essential confidence-building measure to silence the guns and to demonstrate the seriousness of both sides, to open the space for political discussion at the national level. The reason that the U.S. and partner countries continue pushing for a comprehensive and inclusive national dialogue is that we don't see another way forward. We believe it represents the best way to bring about a sustainable peace and to grapple with fundamental issues of governance, political inclusiveness, resource sharing, national identity, and social equality. And so I would emphasize that a real national dialogue will only work if it includes a broad range of stakeholders who can participate free from persecution. This not only means the armed and unarmed opposition, as my colleague Abdurrahman has pointed out very well in their report, it also means non-governmental Sudanese stakeholders, members of civil society, of course, opposition party members, youth activists, religious minorities, women leaders, and others. So I would also emphasize that they not only be invited to be participants, but they need to have an essential role in shaping the design of the dialogue, again, as the report lays out. This was stipulated by the AU-PSC, who mandated that the AU High-Level Implementation Panel be convened preparatory meetings to discuss the rules and the process for the national dialogue, to establish a collective view of what type of national dialogue Sudan needs. It is important that stakeholders, especially from marginalized communities, participate in this important phase. Ensuring that their views are heard will give them faith in the process and ensure that all sides perceive the process to be credible. Unfortunately, when the government of Sudan impedes the rights of its citizens, for example, by preventing opposition members from traveling overseas, as happened earlier this month, or arresting them upon return, this is inconsistent with creating the right confidence-building measures and the right environment conducive to broad and participatory dialogue. So I hope that this discussion can help bring into better focus the elements that are most conducive for a national dialogue, as well as the necessary components of the dialogue itself, and the implementation, which is equally important. I would commend SUDIA for helping to do an excellent job of laying out and getting us beyond difficult process issues. What are some of the actual issues that should be on the table when it comes to what the participants need to discuss? I agree wholeheartedly with the issues that they have laid out, which includes critical governance questions, human rights issues, democracy, corruption, and poverty concerns, as well as, of course, key regional issues. What I would caution, or what I would say I think we need to be very careful about, is to think about sequence and prioritization. After all, as we have seen, half the battle so far with the national dialogue has just been getting the right participants to the table to have a national dialogue. The other half of the battle, if we actually get to that place, we'll be talking about issues of real substance and real import for the people of Sudan. And what it also means, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that ultimately the national dialogue will force a important and serious conversation internally with the government about what aspects it is willing to give up in order to make for and provide for sustainable peace in the future. Because ultimately we do want to make sure the dialogue leads to tangible and real outcomes. So to that end, I would suggest starting simply and practically, building confidence, and slowly working towards more difficult and complex problems. We cannot wait forever for a credible national dialogue to start. I think at some point the window of opportunity will close, and with Sudan's best chance to achieve something more lasting when it comes to peace. So I urge us to not lose sight of the urgency of time and to need for all sides to show some good faith in order to bring about a dialogue that will succeed. I look forward to a candid discussion, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We seem to be at a point, Mr. Ambassador, where the question is, everybody agrees that the idea of a national dialogue is right, that it's the kind of thing that Sudan needs. But there's a serious question as to whether the atmosphere is there. Nimal has laid out so graphically some of the conditions that seem to work against that. On the other hand, you don't want to delay forever, as Stephen has pointed out. How do we move forward? How do we create this atmosphere that can move it forward? What can the government do now to make this dialogue work as it should? If I can ask you that, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ambassador Lehman, and thank you. I'm delighted to be with your distinguished panelists here, and thank you, NED, for the invitation and for making this happen. The national dialogue is really a great initiative, need to be discussed, need to be elaborated, and need to be taken forward. And it's worth mentioning that the initiative of the national dialogue, it came from the government itself. When President Bashir declared this initiative in January 2014, and taking some steps to make it a little bit easier for anyone to participate, and taking to a level that to attract others to be part of this great initiative. And if we look back a little bit, we see that the government made some kind of a big change in the players inside the government itself. When they formed the government after January 2014, we see that many big players in the government whom they saw that will never be out of the government, being a little bit step aside, and new faces from young generations, other partners from the opposition groups, they joined the government. So that's paving the way, giving some kind of confidence that change could be there and the change could be taken even further. After that, the government, with the auspice of His Excellency President Deby of Chad, create a new step, and they called for a conference which called Umjaras Conference, and that conference has been held in March 2014, so as to bring the aspects of the peace, the aspects of the dialogue itself, and how that could be preparing for a big national dialogue to take place. The government also took some kind of great steps to create a momentum for the national dialogue by giving amnesty for all those taking arm against the state, relieving the political detainees, And also later, as we know that the President of the Republic declared a cessation of hostilities for 2 months so as to create a good and conducive atmosphere for the national dialogue. The national dialogue will be the only options that we should take to solve the problems of Sudan once and for all. We all know that wars cannot be a solution for our major issues, for our main problems. And for that, the dialogue will remain the only option for us to reach such kind of solutions. The national dialogue addressed major issues. The issue of peace and war, how we can reach a peace among all stakeholders right now in Sudan. It can address the issue of the national identity, the governance, and the national economy. So with all those areas, with all those issues, I think we can determine some other areas that need to be touched and discussed and reach agreements and consensus among all those issues. The national dialogue is right now not just an idea. It is a reality that has taken on the ground. People are there sitting in Khartoum. Many participants from different political parties. We have right now more than 90 political parties participating in this process. We have different civil societies have been participating. Armed and rebel groups have been participating too. They even came right now from outside and joined this process. So there is major committees being formed for this process, and this major committees has been also nominate other dignitaries and figures, national figures from Sudan, to be as facilitators. Those are not belonging to the government. They are from the different part of the society, whether the political parts or the leaders among the society, as facilitators to take this process. The chairs of the committees that have been formed also are national figures. And the issues right now under the process. Some people, they think that for this national dialogue to be as a reality, they need one thing. They need the government to be dismantled, all those people in the government right now to be taken away, either to Hague, as Nemat suggested in some areas, or to take wherever they need to be taken to, and then the national dialogue will be viable and will be a real process. That is not going to take us anywhere. We called from the first place that the national dialogue should be inclusive, should be comprehensive in terms of issues, and should be transparent. I guess right now, in terms of comprehensiveness of the issues, that we are doing good. In terms of transparency, Abdurrahman is coming from there. People are discussing various and broad issues. In terms of inclusiveness, we open the doors for anyone to come and participate. And the time frame that Deputy Secretary Celestine Steve is referring to, that came because we are keen enough to contact and communicate with the rebel groups, and we set committees, and we send many people that they could be a little bit trusted by the rebel groups to persuade them, to ask them to come and join, but they are still refusing to do so. So, shall we take the whole Sudan and the whole Sudanese people hostage until those people come and participate, or we can start the process until they will come at any stage, or they classify themselves as war minglers and not peacemakers. So still we have these committees going on, trying to reach out to the rebel groups. And some of them, they accept and they join already, and some are still outside waiting. What I'm trying to say that the government is really committed to take this process very seriously, and any outcome from this national dialogue is going to be subject to implementation. We don't need people right now to join to some kind of conclusions. Every issue, all those big issues that we explained are subject to debate and negotiations and to reach agreement upon them. And whatever agreements there will be reached is going to be implemented by the government. And the real test in this one, as we all know that when we discussed the comprehensive peace agreement, there was some kind of skepticism that the government is not going to take the outcome of the comprehensive peace agreement in a serious way, and they are not going to implement it. But we were courage enough to implement that one. And definitely, as you all know, that it includes the referendum about the South Sudan, and we reached the point of decision, and we were the first country to recognize the new border state of South Sudan. So what we are trying to achieve at this stage is to discuss the issues of Sudan, to come with a new national constitution to be the terminal source of laws that can govern Sudan with the participation of all stakeholders in this regard. We are fully committed. We are fully keen to see this process coming to good results and to good ends. And we are really keen about implementing the outcome of this national dialogue. I will stop here, and I will be glad to take any kind of further questions.
I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions, but let me put out a question that later I would ask the panelists to think about. Because we're caught here between the need to move forward, as several people have said, and what's missing in the atmosphere to make it as inclusive and free. And I'm just wondering if just lay out two things, whether there may be divisions within the government about the dialogue, a commitment in principle, but for perhaps some of the security services, not a commitment in practice, and how is that overcome? Second, whether one has to build in earlier rather than later the type of face-to-face discussions and basically confrontations, if you will, that Nima talked about, of those who feel that they are suffering in a very real and direct way, and those who are doing this, and build that in earlier to the process rather than putting it, as it often is, as a second thing that comes after all the other things. Because if that issue isn't addressed, if those feelings aren't addressed early on, they undermine some of the objectives and the credibility to everyone. So let me leave those questions out there for you to think about. We'll come back to them, but I don't want to presume upon the audience and let them open up for questions. So please raise your hand. Do indicate your name and affiliation, and try to keep it to questions. Who would like to start? Well, wait a minute. We won't start with the embassy. You can come back, Jamal. We'll start with someone. It's right there. Yes, yes, right there. Please. Do we have a microphone? There it's coming. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Adil Taha. I'm from the Sudanese Independent Movement. I have two questions. One for the anybody at the podium, but about something missing here. The ideology of the government. Nobody is talking about it. I think one of the major obstacles for the national dialogue is the ideology of the government. The ideology of the government, we don't have to forget this. This is an Islamic fundamentalist government. All right? This is the same government harbor bin Laden, all right? Supporting, is still on the list of the State Department of the state that's sponsoring terrorism. All right? So the South, even for the South of Sudan to be really get independent, because they said if we get an option between, or to choose between keeping Sudan united or keeping it as an Islamic state, they said we keep it as an Islamic state, let the Christian go and have their own state. So
let's keep it to questions so we can
yeah,
move
okay,
forward.
thank you very much. The question here, the ideology and the negotiation with the Hitler of Sudan. This is the president of Sudan is being indicted by the International Criminal Court of committing genocide. How are you going to negotiate or conduct a dialogue with a government that committed genocide? The second question for the Abdurrahman, you said there is some regional issues or problems, and you said like in the north, the dams, and in Darfur. I don't think this is really regional. The Nubian heritage and culture and civilization is a civilization belong to everybody in the world, not just only the Nubian. So just by really putting it as this is a regional issue, and by losing the heritage, the humanitarian, for the Sudan, this is not. And the same thing in Darfur.
Okay, but we really have to get the other people a chance. Thanks, though. I think I see a hand right in the back, right there.
Thank you. My name is Komil Yasser. I'm Nuba Mountain International Station president. My question is for the representative of the Sudan, Embassy of the Sudan. He says that to have a dialogue, we need to have the healthy environment. And he said they change some phases for government at the good phase. This is not a good phase. We all know that after 2 months, when the war broke in Nuba Mountain, the SPLM North and the government, they signed framework peace agreement between Chairman Malgagar and Nafe. Nafe is not now part of the government, but al-Bashir is the one who rejected that peace agreement. If we need to have a dialogue, we need to create the environment, good environment for dialogue. Government is denying access for humanitarian to Nuba Mountains. They're bombing civilians every day. They declare the ceasefire, but they're not respected. Just last month, they attacked SPLA positions in Blue Nile like 3 times. Plus they're still terrorizing people in Khartoum. Like in October 14, they beat 5 civilians from Nuba Mountain to death. They forced them to drown in a river because they say that they're selling alcohol. This is not kind of a situation people that can have a dialogue. First, we need to have the rule of law. We need to respect the human right, so after that we can have the talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take one more and then turn to the panel. Yes, right over here.
Lawrence Freeman. Hello? Working? Lawrence Freeman, Executive Intelligence Review Magazine on Africa. I wanted to ask Ambassador Khalid a question, because there's been a discussion by all the panelists on the environment and atmosphere in these negotiations. given the fact there's been a long-term policy by Washington, among others, for regime change against President Bashir and the National Ruling Congress Party. And given the fact there's been this long-term policy of sanctions, even though every year there's a discussion of removing Sudan from the list of terrorist-sponsored terrorists, even though there's been no proof of this for over 10 years, how much does this attitude against the government, against the president, contribute to spoiling the atmosphere for an actual inclusive and just dialogue? Thank you.
Okay, we have a lot of questions here. Abdullah, you want to comment on that question of the regional versus national issues and any other of these questions, and I'll turn to the other panelists and to you, Niamat.
Okay, if you allow me also to comment on your question about whether some things like what my colleague Ahmad spoke about should be handled up front or before. I think
Yes.
my own position is that the process of running the dialogue itself can have mechanisms worked into it that that make room for recognizing these grievances. So I think it should be worked into the whole process of how the dialogue is run, rather than having them before and then looking at the process. So it should be integrated into the process and the design of how the dialogue is facilitated or run or managed. I agree. I mean, with the comment about the heritage, I think yes, the Nubian heritage is. It's not only Nubian, but when the point was raised about the heritage, it was the drowning or the thinking of the actual sites of the Nubian kingdoms in the northern region. So the flooding caused by the dams made them lose these sites forever. So that's the sense that they put it on, rather than the overall heritage. Yeah, I think that's it.
Mr. Messer, you had several questions. One is on the ideology of the government. One is on this whole question of the environment, examples that have been given that seem to run against it, and then this question that I asked about, is the government really united on this?
Yeah, definitely, Mr. Lyman, that the government is really united in this one. And whatever decisions that came out from the president, every and each one in the government and each and everybody from the government is really obligated to implement those decisions. And the armed forces and the national security and intelligence, they are the first whom trying to implement right now what the president is decided about the amnesty for those who took arm against the state, and for releasing the prisoners, the political prisoners. The conducive atmosphere that we're looking for and looking forward for, definitely there is still some people that they are truly believe not in the dialogue, not in the negotiations, but they truly believe that the government should be removed by arms again and by war. So if that will be the case, so I don't think we are going just to let this happen under any way. And the government has responsibilities to protect the civilians, to protect the entire state. So you will not leave the declaration from someone that they are still going for war to change the government. Those who believe in the in the dialogue itself, in its spirit, that they are subject to be, in favor for the national dialogue, for them to bring them in this process. This is part of that, and I guess the suffering of the people, whether they will be in Darfur, in the two areas, or in the rest part of Sudan, they could be tackled and dealt with, and they could be lifted by courageous decisions from all stakeholders to come to the negotiation table to negotiate the fate and the future of Sudan away from the war, banners and war drums. In the issue of the ideology, I guess this is still the same old rhetoric that would pull Sudan back for some years. This is some kind of just labeling to try to discourage the other partners for the government of Sudan to deal with the government and to try to bring some kind of, for the international community to a little bit try to perceive the government still as a government that hosting and harboring terrorism. The State Department reports in regard of the counterterrorism, they stated very clearly that Sudan, the country, is cooperating, dealing with the United States and it is relevant agencies with international community in fighting terrorism. In fact, Sudan is saving American lives in this aspect. So I think try to discourage people from dealing with Sudan by such kind of labeling. This is an old tactics and will reach us nowhere.
Quickly, because we're running out of time, but the question about regime change, does that impact on your policy that people talk about regime change?
Talking about regime change, I guess this is one of the issues that lead to many sort of problems that facing us right now. This government is representing the Sudanese people comprehensively. There is oppositions from different parts, that's true. But again, the issue of Sudan cannot be solved in some kind of exclusion. You cannot exclude this government from any kind of future. In fact, they are in power right now. And to be honest, if they would like also to go and rule for some years to come, they have the ability to do so. And we are all witnessing this. Most of the trials that came before to remove this power, whether by force, by arms, it didn't went through, and it didn't go anywhere. So the government itself took the initiative of the national dialogue to bring a solution to the problems of Sudan by including the other stakeholders. Right now they are out of the government through negotiations, through inclusion in this process of national dialogue. And I guess this will be the only opportunity for us to seize it, to take it, and not to lose it.
Steve, can I ask you to comment and then Nehemiah?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I think what's so important about the national dialogue is that it represents a question about where people actually want to see Sudan go, what direction it wants to go. And part of what is inherent in that question, to begin with, in terms of just how it's even structured and who is included within that and what types of issues are confronted, I think is important from the get-go to really think about in a careful way. In the sense that, while we are on the one hand talking about what a potential national dialogue would look like and what kind of structures would need to be in place and how it should be formatted and what issues should be on the table, we also are in a situation where the national dialogue has actually already started, albeit started in not a completely comprehensive or inclusive manner as of last month. So you have a bit of a contradiction that to begin with in terms of what the national dialogue represents. And to me, that sets a slightly concerning starting point, because I think what's important is that the form is done in the right way, and that there is agreement that about what issues are to be discussed and how they will be discussed. And there is also agreement that having all players and stakeholders at the table is something that is important. Because I don't see how, if this is meant to be something that does support and bring about something more enduring, that is supposed to represent a different direction for Sudan, it is hard for me to see how we get from here to there if we don't confront the hard issues on the table and we don't have all the right players, including both the armed and unarmed opposition, as well as civil society, at the table to begin with. So I would just reemphasize that point.
Let me let Nehemiah comment if we can, and then I'll open it up again.
Well, um, yeah, I'd first like to highlight what Abdurrahman said in regard to what I have laid out. I I tend to be the truth teller, and truth telling is very important for us to make resolution. This is about life and death. People of Sudan are dying, and it's not just a country that in peace and people want to negotiate. Speaking about Kenya, about other countries, um, the president of Kenya went to The Hague and faced the ICC. Is that kind of will exist in Sudan? The ambassador just mentioned that, as Nimat mentioned, I didn't say the ICC. I know that kind of discussion doesn't take us anywhere right now, so I didn't bring it, but I'm glad you brought it. Yeah, it's like one individual, is he willing to face justice if he's not guilty? So I don't want to go into that situation, but if you are willing to make solution for millions of people as an individual, is that something you can do? Are there other people in your party that you are members of that government? Are you willing? Like, I wish to see you have a tone different than President Bashir's tone. So I assume that different people have different level of responsibility and different level of participating in what happened in Sudan. So unfortunately, that sounds that that's not the case. And it is the national dialogue as it is right now, as if you invited people for a dinner, you pick the menu, and you decided what to serve people. So people can come and go. There has been so many negotiations. There has been so many peace agreements, even negotiated and mediated internationally in Sudan. When did they go? Doha Agreement, Addis Ababa Framework Agreement, and the Comprehensive Peace Agreement that brought independence to South Sudan. South Sudan is not this in peace. Yes, South Sudanese have the responsibility to resolve their issues, but also part of it, South Sudan is held hostage by Sudan. And the real problem is in Sudan. So someone like me, I survive only to tell the truth. And if we can't speak the truth, we can make solutions. I went to Addis Ababa, for example, 2 years ago. There was Sudanese Forum for Peace on Darfur, that an African organization brought a group of women from different parts of Sudan, including government representatives, civil society, grassroots. There were only 2 women from the internally displaced camp. When women start talking about their issues, and some people talk about accountability for crimes committed against women, so not other people, women themselves confronted each other. Women from the government side threatened the women from Darfur not to speak about rape, not to speak about accountability. And those women, they went back, they never come back to that forum. And later on, the famous Femme African Solidarity is the organization that was holding the forum. They went into having the next forum in Sudan, and then they were forced to cancel the forum by the Sudanese government. So I'm not exaggerating. I'm not bringing this from the top of my head. These are realities that we have lived. And I went to Abuja. No one invited me. I invited myself because I thought I can be part of peace. It's not about that because women have been the most affected. I want there to bring their voices. When people were negotiating, there were gender expert brought from Sudan. This is just women themselves in the room. We're talking about setting women priority for peace. Whatever we list, the women from the government side, they jump, which was very unfortunate. These women are affecting me and affecting them, affecting women in the camp and affecting those who are in Khartoum. But they were told and were given a ready-made written statement to say. So I would imagine like having a national dialogue that is designed or orchestrated by the government and invited people. Yes, the people of Sudan want to show the world that they can make peace. And yes, they are the people of peace. But is the government willing to give up? That's not the case. So I want us to be mindful of that truth that is right now we are living it. This is a reality. It's not a rhetoric. It's not rhetoric. It is a reality right now going on in Sudan. If we want elite type of a consultation or negotiation, we can do it, and it has been going on. But do we want to incorporate people's voice? Do people have a right to be part of discussion? Do people have the right to speak about issues of justice, violence against women, laws that are oppressive and allowing violence against women to take place? So that are the kind of issues that, and we just don't tired of using self-deception, saying it's okay, let's go. People have suffered, and people also have time to be put in life-saving effort instead of just going having these fancy dialogues that is not taking us anywhere. So I want to speak the truth, and I encourage people to think of this and be mindful. And also, as Adil mentioned, you can't. How many of you have relation to Holocaust? Can anyone ask to sit next to Hitler or their representative to negotiate? Why Sudan is an exception? I spoke clearly that the negotiation, the dialogue happened. There are certain factors that is going to make the dialogue a failure. That is just a truth. It is a fact of the matter. It's not something that I brought because I don't want peace. I am the first one who want peace. I haven't seen my mom in 10 years. But do we want to deceive ourselves that we can make a peace, the same type of peace that we are doing every day? And do we want to agree on excluding the majority of the people of Sudan not to have a voice and then say it's okay, let us do it? There are so many experiments have been done. We have been talking to people. There are some outsiders who believe, yeah, let us support this. It may happen. It didn't happen. So I just want to be truthful and speak the truth, live with the truth, and die with that truth. But the condition right now, as the ambassador spoke about, that means they're not talking about issues of justice, and they're not allowing that to happen. But they're anyways going forward. So I don't have any problem if they want to go like that. And if others want to support that, and if that is something reasonable for us to support, and assume that that will bring problems to the people of Sudan, can women from Tabit or women from Darfur who have been raped can come to the dialogue and say, I have been raped, I want my right? That will not never happen. So that is what I mean when I talk about the current conditions. I don't want to delay people, but I just want to be truthful. Thank you.
Let me just take two more, Dane Smith, and then I'll take you and the lady there. We'll take three quick ones. So I don't want to run over. Dane, and then I'll come to you.
Dane Smith. We can all agree that national dialogue is essential to the future of the Sudan. Now, the main problem, of course, is the credibility of the government as it goes forward with national dialogue. The national dialogue was supposedly launched years ago now. The first discussions of it came back in 2012. And yet, the government complains that the various parties are boycotting it. The reason they're boycotting, of course, is that the government has not shown credibility. Failure to implement the Eastern Sudan Agreement, failure to implement the Doha Agreement on Darfur with its extensive provisions for compensation for human rights, and the failure to implement parts of the comprehensive peace agreement relating to South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and other areas, unfortunately, give ample scope for lack of credibility. My own view is that if the government is really serious about such a dialogue and wants to go forward with it, it's going to have to take some very special steps to make that dialogue credible. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask people to be quick. The gentleman here, and then the lady there, and the young man there, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Jamal Malik from the Embassy of Sudan. Thank you so much, Ambassador Lyman. Thank you so much for the panelists for their contribution. I'll be very quick. One comment for Mr. Abdurrahman and a question, and then two questions for the panelists. My comment, you mentioned that some of the issues that should be part of the dialogue, and you mentioned trafficking persons and dams, and the east and the north problems. I guess the national dialogue idea is to talk about the Sudan issues comprehensively. And I guess the issues you mentioned are just, are incorporated in the pillars announced by the President Bashir. My question to you also, among the research and workshop you conducted in Sudan, what is your message to the society in participating in the national dialogue? Do you advise them to be part of it, or you have another idea? Also, the question to Ni'mat, she just mentioned a lot of unverified accusations to the government. My question to her, if not the national dialogue, then what else is the solution should be for Sudan issues? Maybe last question is going to be just for Mr. Deputy Assistant Secretary.
Okay.
Deputy Assistant Secretary, Mr. Stephen Feldstein. You said rightly it's about the time for the national dialogue. For how long should Sudanese people wait for the armed opposition to join the national dialogue while they're fighting among themselves in the leadership of the SRF? Thank you.
And then is the woman right there? And then I'm going to have to just take one more after this because we're at our end point.
Dr. Sherry McFarland with World Peace and Reconciliation, an organization that's focused on peace education. But as sitting here listening today, I just wanted to know, is the role of climate change being discussed in terms of exacerbating the issues on the ground? Is that part of the national dialogue? I know, been following Darfur issues, and I know that's a key issue in exacerbating the conflict in that area. And I just wanted to know, is that an issue that's being discussed vehemently with the national dialogue?
And then young man right there, and yeah, and then we'll have to turn to the panel for final comments and answering these questions as we go.
Thank you. My name is Yasser Zaidan. I'm a graduate student. Everyone here agrees about the trust, or the problem of trust. It's we can't have a national dialogue with a zero-sum mentality, and in fact, this has been going since day one of the founding of the Republic of Sudan. Like as an example, the people of the South didn't get to vote in the Constitution Committee that was being in after the independence. So it's really a hard problem that should be addressed. And my question to Abdurrahman al-Mahdi from SUDIA: how can the civil society bring together this trust issue, bring together the government and the opposition parties into kind of a middle ground that could lead to a full or a good participation in the national dialogue? And the other question is...
Can we just hold it to one, because it's 4:30 and I want, but thank you. And I wish I could take more questions, but we're here, I'm sorry, to the end, and I want to get the panel to answer some of the, I apologize, I know going, unless people want to come up afterwards and we could chat about it. But I'm going to start with you, Stephen, just go across and pick up these questions and other comments as you wish. And I apologize for...
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. I'll be quick because I know we're at the end of the session. I've enjoyed hearing the different perspectives. One question that was posed to me by my colleague at the embassy was about the sort of how long do we wait issue when it comes to different elements of the opposition coming to the table. In a sense, I think that relates to the broader issue of what kind of dialogue do you want? Is this a facade that is meant to sort of demonstrate the pretense of bringing people together without a genuine willingness to actually grapple with the main underlying issues that have led to the violence and conflict that permeates many parts of Sudan today? Or is this something that does represent a genuine good faith attempt to find a solution to many of the problems that have gripped the country in recent years? If it's the latter, then I don't think you can afford not to have the main parties that have issues, that have grievances at the table. I think they have to be there. And I think it also is a little bit of a chicken and egg question, in a sense that the argument going back, which we hear, and I think is also very credible, is that they have not been given an opportunity to participate, either through suppression of different groups, either through detentions, either through other sorts of harassment. And so each side has, I think, some verifiable and some real claims when it comes to this not being a level playing field in terms of actually being able to just get to the table, let alone the hard part, which is then dealing with the issues in a real substantive manner. So I don't have a good answer in terms of the weighting question, but I would reframe it slightly and just say that if there is a good faith intent by the government to really engage in a fruitful manner in a national dialogue in a comprehensive and inclusive way, then it is important that all parties are at the table, and each side, especially the government, must take every step feasible to make sure that those kind of conditions are met. And I think we have been waiting still to really see that attained.
Yep. What Ambassador Dennis Smith has raised about Sudan failure of implementing the agreements, I'm really sad to hear such kind of thing. And the government of Sudan is giving the way for the referendum to take place. They giving the way for the new government of South Sudan to birth, and the first one to implement the security arrangements with the government of South Sudan, while still we are facing the problem in South Kordofan and Blue Nile. As a result of that, the government of South Sudan is not implementing their part in the agreement, and still they are hosting those rebels from Darfur and from the two areas inside Sudan. So whom failed to implement the part of the agreement? And the Doha agreement, we did all the part that we agreed upon, and Dr. Sisi is there, and the missing part is still part of the security arrangements due to the fragmentation among the Tijan party themselves. So we are still facing such kind of problems among the leaders who came from our side, who came through Doha agreement. But we are top to our agreements, and we are implementing them in a good faith. And just I need to finish by saying that what's going on in the national dialogue process is a really genuine process that the government initiated, and they are ready to go through it in a full gear and in a good faith in this one.
Okay. I would just, this issue of urgency, and while I hear the Ambassador Fieldstein's argument that there is an urgency, yes, there is an urgency, but I say that we have one shot of getting this right. If you start talking dialogue and national dialogue and you don't do it properly, the people will lose any sense of belief in that national dialogue will be the way out. So we need to really invest in this and make sure that it happens, and it happens the way it should happen. Now, the government saying we can't wait forever, the Sudanese people have been held hostage, the armed groups. If you really want a genuine dialogue, you would spend the time thinking, what do we need to do to make it successful? And since the president declared dialogue in 2014, you should think of how to make sure that the people you want in the room do come to the room. Invest time in the preparation, in the time leading up to the dialogue, and make sure that you need to find a way of getting the right people in the room. You cannot press ahead and say, these groups, we are pressing ahead. If they're on, they're on. If they're out, we're pressing ahead. It's not going to get us to where we want to be. So yes, we realize there's an urgency, but the pressure and the urgency is on the government, the people responsible, to make sure what's required to be in place is in place so that these people do come to the room. We have been saying that since the first time we were invited to the parliament, the National Legislative Assembly in Khartoum, to say how civil society can participate in the dialogue. You asked that question. What did we say? We said, please, before you tell us you want to participate, let me have my meetings. I cannot run a workshop in Khartoum without security permission. If I just want to consult with people, I can't do that. You need to create a conducive environment. And when we said a conducive, we spelled it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Since April 2014. Nothing's changed. So we're wasting time. And the urgency is there, but the government needs to be sincere and needs to work on these things. Now, if you need help, we'd be happy to help you and show you how that can be done too. We're willing to do that as civil society. And we knock on the doors of the government. We've been knocking on doors of security saying, I can't get my registration license. Can I have a conversation with you to find out what the problem is so that I can do my work? And no one's answering. The door is closed. But we're going to keep knocking on that door because we don't have another option. And we believe that this is the only way out. Yeah. So there was a question also about what role can civil society play in terms of bringing the adversaries together. I think, yes, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to come up with a paper like that and start having a discussion around it with government, with the armed groups, with the political parties, you know. And that's why we're saying to the international community, please help us and make sure that our voices are heard. So when you do have these meetings that you bring in the political parties or you invite the armed groups, make sure you have civil society in that room. Because we can play a mediatory role between them. We can help find common ground to move forward. We can't resolve all our differences, and we can't do that straight up from the start. But we can try to find common ground and gradually move forward using that common ground. So once again, I would just reaffirm that civil society has a role to play. We've started to play that role, and we really hope that the government will take this issue seriously, this dialogue, because time is running out, like Ambassador Fieldstein said, and we've wasted enough time.
Yeah, but did you, very briefly, because our time is running out, but did you have a final comment or to answer on this?
Well, there was a question from here
Right.
that I accuse the government that this, I don't want to go into detail, but the government is accused by a very legitimate international institution, which is the International Criminal Court. But about the incidents that are happening right now, I have all the statistics. I can't speak without a statistic, without reference, but because this panel is not about the statistic and reference and what is going on right now. So I couldn't take people's time to talk about that, but it's quite clear that the government is committing crime every day. Some of the victims are back here in the rooms. Many of them can testify, and the situation today, if you check, the last news part I checked was 2 women, girls in Darfur as young as 2 years old were taken away from their mother and raped. So these are the situation that is still going on inside Khartoum. What is happening right now? So this week on Sunday, 14 Darfur students were arrested. No one knows their whereabouts. So it's just like you can't count on it. But let us go back to national dialogue and what people are saying. Do we want to maintain the system, or do we want to transform the Sudan? So if we want to maintain it, then the government of Sudan can design a dialogue and invite people and give people vacancies. That is exactly what they do. Invite opposition group. It's not about the opposition. It's not about the political leaders. These are few handful individuals. What about the majority of the people in the country? Can they have a vote? Can they have the right to have a voice or not? If we are assuming that harmful individuals can speak for those other people, that is exactly what brought the problem in Sudan. Because the presidency, where the decision taken about destroying Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile, there wasn't anyone from Darfur there. That's why people have no political power, have no participation, have no right to decision making. That is why what's going on right now, we are faced with this challenging crisis. And it's just reality. It's reality. It's not something that I brought. Everyone here in this room know what are the kind of crimes going on in Sudan including the arrest warrant of the ICC that right now is pending against President Bashir. If we want to maintain the same system that has killed everyone, ordered rape against women, arrested those who, civil society who are struggling peacefully, want to change their country, that then we can maintain that. But if we want real transformation, then we have to think twice before we can just be nice to each other and say, oh, okay, this is fine, it should work.
Yeah, thank you, Nima. Thank you. Look, this has been a very important discussion. I'll just say one thing about it. The real challenge of a national dialogue in this situation is the readiness of all the parties to consider significant change, rather than continuing a system, however modified at the edges, that does not solve the problems of conflict, of mistrust, etc. And all sides, and that includes the government, has to say, we're ready to think of very different ways of managing the country. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. If people approach it as a zero-sum game, then there will be resistance to change. The creativity, the real creativity in the dialogue, should be how to make fundamental change without anyone feeling that their total rights have been eliminated for the future. That's hard, but it has to be open to that degree of change. It has to listen to the real grievances. It has to listen to the people. Why did they want to overthrow the government? You don't want them to think that way, I agree, but why do they want to have to be there at the table? And then to engage in a really true dialogue that says, let's look at a way this system can be fundamentally changed, not to throw anybody into the bay, but to bring about a system in which everybody is participating fairly. That's a very difficult dialogue to do, very difficult to do on all sides. But that seems to me, as I listen to this, is the real challenge. It's a challenge for the government, it's a challenge for all the participants. But for the government, I would say, clearly lifting that environment of repression and difficulties for voices to be heard, to be organized, is a very important step toward giving credibility to what the government is trying to do. So thank you all very much. I apologize that we ran over, but the discussion's been very important. Thank you. Thanks to the panel.